Hey guys, Patrick Coker out here once again talking to folks about the 10 Commandments, doing some serious investigations. Let's talk about talking behind someone's back, particularly lying about them behind their back. How do you feel about that?
I think it's really wrong. I think it's very rude as well.
Have you experienced it?
Yeah, definitely.
And how did it make you feel?
Not good at all whatsoever.
There's one called bear false witness, and what that basically means is talking lies behind someone's back. Have you ever had that happen before?
Yes, I've had that happen before.
And how'd that make you feel?
Not good. I would like to be able to speak for my own name, but if people want to say whatever, at the end of the day, I can't really do much about it.
Which one do you have trouble following the most?
I think I'm pretty good with the, not wanting to murder somebody, but I guess I hate to say it, but lying, it's easy to tell a little white lie every now and then, and you don't think much of it, which is something that I have to consciously, if I'm busy, I should tell someone, not just lie and be like, oh, I don't want to come or something like that.
Sometimes I lie for no reason whatsoever. There's one called bear false witness, and what that basically is talking about is people saying lies about you behind your back. Wow. Have you had experience with that before?
Of course, yeah. Everybody always has something to say behind my back, but no one really wants to ever say anything in front. But people do that because they know that you're not watching. They know you can't do nothing when it's behind your back.
I think it's okay to vent. Venting is normal. We're gonna always have problems with other people. That's normal, but I think it depends on how we handle that.
I also think if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say it. It's always gonna get back to them.
So have you ever been tempted to lie?
All the time. All the time. No one is perfect except Jesus. We sin every single day.
Yeah. Well, hey, if I haven't met you yet, my name is Jake. Good to be with y'all this morning. We are in commandment number 9 this week, so getting close to the finish line. If you have a Bible, we're going to be in Deuteronomy Chapter 5, verse 20. So go ahead and turn there. And as y'all are getting there, some of y'all know that I'm a dad of 3 kids, ages 7, 5, and 3. And as you can imagine, if you're a young parent, we have our hands full a lot. And one role that I was not aware of that I would have to be doing a lot is the role of a judge, where I'm constantly having to figure out what is true. And when the kids come against me to complain about someone, I have to figure out what is true and what's the verdict. And I kid you not, it even happened a couple times this morning. This happens all the time, but generally what happens is the kids will be playing in another room and then one of them starts crying and then they come running up to me or my wife, and it usually goes something along the lines of, hey, so-and-so hit me, or so-and-so said a bad word or a mean word. Or this is a new one they've started doing within the last couple weeks is broken heart. If they do that, it's the worst thing you could possibly do. And so for us, we sort of have to figure out, okay, who's telling the truth here and what's going on. And there are times where I have to listen as the judge, and every now and again, I very clearly see, oh, this is actually what happened. Okay, please apologize to them, say something nice to them or something like that, hug it out, forgive each other. There are times when one of them will just straight up lie to our faces, and that gets really fun for us to sort of figure out. And then there are times when it's a bit more complex, and after hearing the case hey, they hit me, I'm hey, I know why you thought that, but that's not actually what happened. They didn't mean to do that on purpose, and let me show you why. And today's commandment speaks into that sort of complexity. Deuteronomy chapter 5, verse 20 reads this, and you shall not bear false witness against your neighbor. Now, if you grew up in church, you may have been told this just means don't lie. And that certainly has a big part to do with this commandment. But this idea that you see of bearing false witness against your neighbor, what it has in mind is sort of a courtroom scenario to where back in the ancient Israelite days, generally, if there's a judge, they have to hear the case, and the primary evidence they had to go off of was eyewitness testimony. So they didn't have DNA evidence, no video surveillance, no CSI technology or anything like that. A judge in hearing a case would have to basically weigh out their decision based off of eyewitness testimony. And so you have this idea of a witness against someone else. It had enormous weight in that time. And this commandment assumes that we as people, we have a proclivity towards sin, and we can and do bear false witness, especially when it goes to serve our own interests. So not only is this commandment about don't lie, it also has this angle of lying through defaming other people or lying to further your interests at the expense of other people. This is why you have Old Testament law that gets a little bit more extreme, but it's this commandment being played out. I have one for you up on the screen, Deuteronomy Chapter 19. Check this out. A single witness shall not suffice against a person for any crime or for any wrong in connection with any offense that he has committed. Only on the evidence of 2 witnesses or 3 witnesses shall a charge be established. And the reason being is because people lie, and having just one eyewitness testimony is not enough. And I understand that at times a command like this can feel really maddening, especially if you're the victim of a crime and you're the only one who bears witness to it. But this command right here in Deuteronomy 19 was put in place to safeguard against people using a false witness to condemn an innocent person. And penalties for certain offenses at this time went all the way up to death. So it was possible for a false accuser to bring a claim against someone, and if believed, the innocent person would literally have been killed. And if you want a just society, you don't want that. So they have safeguards and commands put in place to prevent one person from just lying and smearing anyone's name, lest an innocent person gets unjustly punished. And then it has this to say in verse 18 of the same command. It says, the judges shall inquire diligently, and if the witness is a false witness and has accused his brother falsely, then he shall do to him as he had meant to do to his brother. So this is one of those extreme verses where we're supposed to read it and have a collective sort of yike moment, like, oh my goodness, this is very intense. So in other words, if there's a false witness and they're trying to get an innocent person in trouble, if the false witness was trying to get the innocent person put in jail and it's found out that this person was actually lying, the false witness would get thrown in jail, but it would get like even more extreme if the false witness was trying to defame someone or distort the truth so as to get that person executed. If it was found out that this person was straight up lying to everyone, that person would get killed. And the whole idea is God takes truth telling very, very seriously here. He goes on to say, so you shall purge the evil from your midst, and the rest shall hear and fear and shall never again commit any such evil among you. In other words, people who bore false witness were dealt with radically and quickly so as to set an example to the rest of Israel to be like, hey, we cannot be the kinds of people who spread false witness about other people because it could do so much damage and destruction to a society. And we have to deal with it right away before this whole idea of lying and defaming other people infects our society as a whole. Now, before we move on, to be really clear here, I'm not saying that we should go back to like those times, right? Those commands were set for Israel at a specific time and place. I'm not saying that the civil laws are binding to us, but what is binding to us is God's moral law and the 10 commandments. And we see through a command like Deuteronomy 19 that God takes telling the truth very, very seriously. And in fact, if you go to Genesis 1-3, you see ever since the dawn of time, we were supposed to be a people who love the truth and who live out the truth. What it means to be a human, according to the scriptures, is that we are people who are committed to the truth no matter what. And what you'll notice is the first attack by Satan in the garden in Genesis 3, among all the things Satan could have done, the way he turns humanity off track and gets them to sin is through telling a lie. That's how he throws humanity off course, by telling them a lie. And we're supposed to see just in the narrative of Genesis 1-3, among other things, that words have immense power. They have immense power. So God, in Genesis 1 and 2, he creates simply by speaking things into existence. By his words, things are created. And he paints this beautiful, abundant, true reality of God is good and he's gracious and he's glorious and he's meant to be trusted and worshiped. And words have these immense sort of power. And then Satan comes in Genesis 3, and with his own words, he paints this separate reality, a false reality that is not true at all. And Adam and Eve are sort of left in this decision in Genesis 3. Who are they going to trust? Which reality are they going to commit themselves to? Are they going to commit to a reality where it's all about God's kingdom, that he is good and almighty and worth trusting? Or are they going to trust the false reality of Satan and his lies? And in the process, they end up choosing the false reality and they give in to sin. And with these two realities in their minds, they act on a false reality. And in the process, brought nothing but chaos and betrayal and sin and distrust and heartache into the world for believing a lie. So now there's this battle going on, not only in the human heart, but in the world at large, lies versus truth. Is it false reality and the destruction it brings, or the true reality and the goodness and abundance that comes as a result? And who will win at the end of the day? And in this cosmic battle happening all around us, we who are made in the image of God have a role in this cosmic battle to play with our words. What kingdom will we decide to trust in? What kingdom will we build? Will it be a kingdom off of lies and of false reality, a kingdom of Satan, or will we, with our words, instead choose to trust Jesus and choose to trust his reality and build his kingdom with the words that we speak over other people? And just in case, if you weren't already feeling the immense weight of how powerful your words are, I've got one more for you that'll make you sort of scratch your head and go, huh? Matthew chapter 12 says this. This is Jesus talking. He says, the good person out of his good treasure brings forth good, and the evil person out of his evil treasure brings forth evil. I tell you, on the day of judgment, people will give account for every careless word they speak. And by your words, you will be justified, and by your words, you will be condemned. Like I said, sort of scratch your head and go, what now? It's like, all my words? Like every single one of them? Like, what if I'm grumpy? Or what if it's a Monday? Jesus says, yes, every single word. Jesus is in agreement with the 9th command. He's in agreement with the whole, with the narrative of Genesis, that words are very powerful. Words can become a weapon to tear others down, or it can be a tool to build people up. They can bring division or unity, death or life, and it's either Satan's kingdom or the kingdom of God. And which one are we going to build up through our words? And so at its most basic application of this command, we are to be a people who refuse to knowingly spread lies about other people in a way that benefits us. Don't lie in direct, overt ways, because that furthers the kingdom of Satan and his rule and his domain of lies. And maybe for you this morning, you already have plenty enough right there to go ahead and work on by the Spirit to repent. But as is the case with all of these commandments, there's a ton more going on under the surface. So to help us sort of figure out, okay, don't lie overtly, but like, what does this look like in everyday life? To help answer that, in preparing for the sermon, I came across what's known as the Heidelberg Catechism. Anybody? Heidelberg Catechism? Okay. I figured I'd get like 2 claps. That's fine. The Heidelberg Catechism, it's a 500-year-old document that followers of Jesus put together to sort of crystallize and summarize basic Christian doctrine. And they said this about the 9th commandment that I thought was really helpful, that I thought I would share with you. They say this: to obey the 9th commandment means that I never give false testimony against anyone, twist no one's words, not gossip or slander, nor join in condemning anyone rashly or without a hearing. Rather, in court and everywhere else, I should avoid lying and deceit of every kind. These are the very devices the devil uses, and they would call down on me God's intense wrath. I should rather love the truth and speak it candidly and openly acknowledge it, and I should do what I can to guard and advance my neighbor's good name, which that stuff, that slaps. Like, that is really good stuff, y'all. I'm just gonna break that down for us real quick. I know that was a lot of words. Let me just break that down real quick. That I never give false testimony against anyone, twist no one's words, not gossip or slander, nor join in condemning anyone rashly. So never give false testimony. That's a really obvious one. But also don't twist anyone's words or use it against them, which I get. If you are arguing with someone, it is really hard not to do that. But that would be a breaking of the 9th commandment, to use someone's words and turn it against them. But it goes on, never gossip. Don't pass along a report about someone in an unhelpful way that will damage the person. So don't slander, that is spreading information about someone that is false, or don't allow negative information about someone to become the main lens by which you interpret everything that they do. I love the next part. I want to put that back up on the screen again. Not condemning anyone without a hearing. So as Jesus followers who see our words have the power to bring about life and destruction, we don't rush to judgment on anyone based off of a soundbite or what you heard through the grapevine. We don't arrive to conclusions about someone without a proper hearing, without first going to them first. At times it can feel like someone has talked to literally everyone else in the room except the person that they are slandering. They've not given them a fair hearing, and that's a breaking of the 9th commandment, which to apply this, if we were to live this out, I think for what it's worth, most of Twitter and the 24-hour news cycle would get canceled by just trying to live this out, just saying. So we try to avoid that. And then lastly, I love this. Not only do we avoid all this stuff, but as followers of Jesus, it says this, that I should do what I can to advance my neighbor's good name. Like I said, y'all, this is awesome stuff right here. Do what I can. If I hear anyone talking negatively about my neighbor, which according to Luke chapter 10, Jesus says, everyone is your neighbor. So if I hear anyone talking badly about anyone else, my job to live out this commandment is I should insert myself and just be their defense lawyer. They're not there to represent themselves. So if I see gossip spreading, then as someone who loves Jesus and who loves people, who recognizes that every single human being is made in God's image, I should insert myself and I should stand up for the person no matter what. And we stick up for them as though we would want someone to stick up for us if the roles were reversed. So I'm hoping y'all see that this is a really big commandment for us to sort of live out. It's more than just lying. It's to be a defender and lover of the truth. In a world where the spirit of the age is to twist people's words, to point the blame on others, to justify ourselves, we refuse to give into that. And instead, we choose to build up the kingdom of God with words that bring life, who refuse to give in to tearing down others and instead defend and encourage and understand one another and bless one another with our words. So to get this really practical, because the spirit of the age is all about gossip and slander, and we see it everywhere around us in social media and in news coverage and everything in between, I think it's really easy to sort of grow numb to this. When this is the water that we are swimming in, it's so normalized. It's hard to actually see gossip and slander when it's happening right in front of you. And as followers of Jesus, we want to recognize that, and we don't want to fall accidentally into breaking this commandment. So we should be the ones who shut down the conversation when we see gossip or slandering happening around us. So to make it really practical, I have a handful of suggestions or scripts that you can use. Whenever you see gossip or slander go down, you could say something like this. You could say, hey, what is the reason we're talking about this person? If we're just smearing the person, can we shut this conversation down now? Or are we being charitable in our assessment and giving them the same grace that we would want to receive? If not, we should really stop this, y'all. Or, okay, I'm hearing you talk about this. Do you plan on talking to them about this immediately? Okay, if not, then you don't need to talk to me about it. Or, hey, we don't know both sides of the story, so it's not going to do us much good just sitting around talking about them. Or, I love this, we heard about a pastor who, the way they sort of nipped this in the bud was this pastor, whenever he would have a church member or a staff member start talking to them in his office about someone, let's say the person's name is Steve. They start gossiping about Steve. The pastor would go, that's weird. That doesn't sound like something Steve would do. Let's give him a call right now. And so y'all can just sort of sort this out. And he said by doing that, it just sort of nipped that sort of culture of gossip in the bud, like right away. I love that. And if our aim is to create a culture where truth reigns, where people are valued, then scripts like that should not seem weird. And even if it does make things weird, which it may very well be the first couple times you do that, better to be okay with some social awkwardness than to let the kingdom of Satan continue building power. In a world that is quick to condemn everyone without a hearing, we should seek to understand and to be slow to judge. This means there should be a noticeable distinction in our Christian community that if a non-Christian were to walk in, they would say that we have this understanding that our words have immense power. That when we talk about people, we say nothing but encouraging, loving, understanding things. We should be distinct. We should put an uncommon weight on our words. Now, before I move on, let me just say, maybe some of us in the room right now, this is immediate application for you this morning. Maybe you've become too tolerant of gossip. Maybe there's part of you that secretly and sinfully enjoys it, and maybe repentance for you this morning is to take the words you say more seriously, because you might actually be creating a false narrative or a false reality onto others that's actually destructive to not only your soul, but the people around you. But as I begin to sort of wrap up, I do want to spotlight an area that I think could really be a big blind spot for us, especially in the culture that we live in. And to do that, I want to go back to the example at the start of my sermon this morning when I often end up being the judge at my house. It's sometimes my kids, who I love like more than anything in the world and would do anything for. I also know that they are sinful and they can be a false witness against the other, and they know it. They want to avoid the consequence, so they knowingly participate in a lie. And there are other times when they are being a false witness and they just don't even realize it. Like there are times when my kids are playing and one of the kids comes crying to me saying, "Hey, so-and-so kicked that ball right into my face on purpose." But I happen to have seen just how it went down, and I looked over at them right before that all happened. And I noticed, based off of my information, that they didn't mean to do that. It's that they were winding up to kick the ball, and then they just happened to walk in at the exact wrong time, and then bam, they just got hit in the face. And the thing is, in that situation, my kid, who is crying tears out of their face, believes in their mind that what they perceived is what actually went down. And sometimes, as a parent, I have to lovingly challenge that and say, "Sweetie, I love you. I know that's what you think happened, but I saw that too, and let me tell you what exactly happened." And I try to help steer my child towards understanding what is true. And I think there's an equivalent that can be made in our culture at large, where, I'm sure we can think of examples of, let's say, a story happens in the news, and oftentimes what will happen is different news organizations will take that story and run with it based off of what they were already ideologically holding to, right? So let's say a story happens and a news media outlet that is like ideologically right will take that story and make it fit into already their story, their preconceived notions, and make the data points fit their narrative. But then you will take the same story and have a news organization on the ideological left, and they will take that story and make it fit their story. And they will take the data points to just reaffirm what they've already believed to be true. And generally what happens is the truth is somewhere in the middle. But on a smaller scale, the same thing can happen to us, that as story-making creatures, it's easy to take the data points, it's easy to take the story and make it fit or craft a narrative that lines up with what we already believe to be true about someone or something. And it may not even come close to lining up with what is true and what is reality. I remember seeing this in my life when I got married some 9 years ago. This is true. For the first few weeks, I just had this tally in my head of everything that I did wrong. And I just assumed that my wife had that same tally in her head. So for that first month or so, I was really defensive. And when she said things, I would interpret it through the lens of, well, yeah, I bet you're saying that because you've noticed how I've been messing up and how I'm just a letdown. To where eventually came to a head one day and I was really frustrated. And I said something like, look, I know you said this to me on Sunday and then you did this on Tuesday and then you said this to me today. And it's because you think this about me because of what I've done over the last couple weeks where I messed up here and I forgot to say this and I didn't do that. And my wife was just bewildered, like deer in headlights, like, what are you even talking about? That's not true at all. And she sort of gently showed me how I'd been building up these data points in my mind to construct a narrative onto her that wasn't true at all, but I was so convinced in the moment that it was. Or something I heard when talking to a friend from church this week when the pandemic was at its peak last year. They didn't see some folks participating in Zoom life group. And he was like, I haven't seen these people in a while. I have a hunch it's for this reason. And they developed this narrative in their minds based off of the data points. And then one day he called them up to sort of figure out what's going on. And he said, hey, what's up? It's been a while since we heard from you. Where you guys been? Full well believing it was a certain narrative that he had built up in his mind. And the person on the other end said, oh yeah, I'm so sorry about that. Like me and my family had COVID for the last couple of weeks and we were just so wiped out and we were just trying to take care of one another. We forgot to tell you guys, I'm so sorry. And he was like, oh dang, I had absolutely no idea. And sometimes the story that pops into your mind based off of the data points can sometimes be way off base, way out of line with what is actually reality. Now, to be clear, sometimes the story can fit the data points, but our default as followers of Jesus should be one of charity and seeking the truth by going to the people involved, lest we build up a false reality in our minds and create division and bitterness in the process. And if I can be a bit more transparent when it comes to this, not only does this happen at a macro level with the news or on a micro level in marriage and relationships, but this is just as susceptible to happen in our church as well. I heard from a good friend of mine a few weeks ago. She attended a women's ministry conference where leaders from all over the country spoke on how hard ministry has been since the pandemic and coming out of it. And they were just sharing story after story of one person leaving the church after another. Friends within the church that they've known for years leaving because of believing something about the other that wasn't true, or leaders and staff leaving because of spreading gossip or slander, or folks who were in conflict about something that once they were approached had already had their minds made up about the church and had built a narrative in their minds about the leader and already had one foot out the door. And my friend was just sitting there, just floored as to how pervasive this issue is everywhere right now in the American church. That these female leaders from all over the place were all experiencing the same heartache of what happens when false realities and narratives creep in and divide a church, which again, for clarity, it could very well be that at times the data points do match the story. And I'm sure you can think of leaders who were unhealthy and people who rightfully left a church. But again, when gossip and slander become the water that you're swimming in, I would argue it's far, far easier to believe the worst about someone than it is to be an agent and defender of truth and reconciliation. And could it just be for the last year and a half when because of COVID and a lot of people didn't see each other's faces, that in the process, we became susceptible to building and believing such false narratives about other people. And when that happens, it becomes so easy to take the data points and become a false witness, building up a false reality, oftentimes without even knowing it, perhaps even building a story about others. So by the time you are confronted, the narrative is just so locked into your mind that there is no convincing you otherwise. And let me just say this too, that generally speaking, the larger the church is and the more in your lives, one another, the more in each other's lives you are in a church, the more susceptible you are to spread misinformation about people. And let me just say, we have a very big church, and the way we do church, we really value being in each other's lives. So we just need to become aware that we are really susceptible to allow this to happen. So in light of all this, I have two realizations I hope we can settle into and two requests, okay? Realization number one is that hurt doesn't think clearly. Hurt doesn't think clearly. We are all prone to believe things that are untrue. We all have the susceptibility to believe lies and tell lies and spread lies. So that's already our starting place. We just need to recognize our sin nature is very susceptible towards breaking this command. But when hurt is brought into the equation, it acts as a multiplier towards wanting to break this command. It makes you so much more prone to believe things that aren't fully accurate. And if we believe that our culture and our sin nature makes us susceptible to lies, and that Satan would love to do nothing more than to tear down something beautiful like a group of Jesus followers trying to build his kingdom here in Columbia, we just need to recognize that Satan would love nothing more than to tear that down. So we need to realize that it's easy to misinterpret and assume people's motives, especially when you are hurt. It's that when you are hurt, your emotions can cloud your judgment, and you can often say things and believe things that aren't lined up with reality because you've been hurt. To give you a really silly example of this, I see this sometimes with our kids, especially when we have to discipline them or tell them to do something that they don't want to do, that their feelings will get hurt, and then they will say things or believe things that are not actually true, but they believe that because they're hurt. A case in point, this was on Wednesday, I believe it was. It was at 6:45 in the morning. We get our kids, we wake them up, we try to get them ready, change their clothes to go to school. And one of them, I won't say who, really did not want to wear pants. And in the process, just for 10 minutes straight, I'm not going to say who, but this person really did not want to wear pants. And for 10 minutes was screaming at the top of his lungs, kicking everyone, crying, saying, I'm not going to wear pants. I'm never going to wear pants. I'm never going to school. I don't like you guys. I'm never going to school. For the record, this person did end up wearing the pants. They did end up going to school. But I use that silly illustration to say that when you are hurt, when your emotions are factored in, it's really easy to say things and believe things that aren't actually in line with reality. And we can do the same thing. We can get clouded by our emotions, and we get locked into stories that make sense based off of our hurt-informed data points. And if we simply operate as if the stories in our minds are 100% objective and true, then the damage can be really heartbreaking. Realization number two is that we are somewhat unreliable narrators. We are somewhat unreliable narrators. For example, let's say I have significant relational conflict with my buddy Scott. All right, me and Scott are cool. We're cool, right? Me and Scott are cool. Y'all heard that. But what happens if I do something that is hurtful to Scott, or he does something that is hurtful to me? What I have learned is in that type of situation, if I go and talk to someone who is not involved in the situation, it would take a very uncommon amount of humility and maturity and self-awareness for me to give them a picture of our conflict that is totally unbiased and completely objective. Does that make sense? In other words, a very uncommon amount of maturity, humility, and self-awareness, meaning it's an amount that many of us just don't have, right? And what tends to happen instead is if I give my side of the story, what tends to happen is I will downplay my part of it to get me off the hook, and I will make Scott look like the villain of the story. And the truth is, our hurt and our pain and our confusion, we often bear false witness without even knowing it. So I think if we want to get to the deepest levels of this, we have to start by realizing we are somewhat unreliable narrators. And we have to grow in the humility to realize that we are not always big enough to see the full story, and that more often than not, we only get one angle of the situation. So in humility, we should use very precise, defendable speech. We should not exaggerate or highlight things to make us look innocent and the other party guilty. And if you are in conflict with someone and you're speaking about that conflict to someone else, you should represent their position in a way that if they were there standing right next to you, they would be able to say, yes, you understand, you've articulated this situation fairly. Request number 1, aggressively assume the best. Let's be a people who aggressively assume the best. Satan is doing a good enough job on his own, creating chaos and unreality. And when we default to assuming the worst about each other, we help him out tremendously. And when we jump to conclusions and condemn people without a proper hearing out or going to them directly, we make Satan smile. So please, let's intentionally decide to assume that there are probably factors we don't know about. And let's aggressively assume the best in each other, not in a naive way, but in a countercultural, charitable way. We live in a culture that encourages being offended, and we need winsome Christians who are willing to reject that, to have our starting place be to assume the best, and we can adjust it if we find out otherwise. Because assuming someone else's motives is a dangerous game to play. So let's refuse to play it out for the glory of God and for the sake of our unity in our church family. And request number 2, to sort of wrap up, let's clarify and reconcile with urgency. Let's clarify and reconcile with urgency. I would love it, just in terms of applying this sermon this morning, I would love it if we had a communal commitment that when we feel or hear certain things, we go directly to God in prayer about it, and we go directly to the person involved. And you might even say something like, hey, this is how I perceived this situation. Can you confirm or deny that? Or, hey, I'm concerned this is happening based off of these data points I have. Can you shed any light on this? Because I do not want to assume false motives unto you. I would love for us to recognize the immense potential for false stories to be used by our enemy so we can humbly and quickly address any potential for that to happen, because we want to be a people who love truth and who live out the truth. And we want to be humble enough to know we don't always know the whole truth, and we want to be absolutely sure we are bearing witness to the truth. In fact, Jesus has really strong words when it comes to dealing with relational tension and conflict. In Matthew 5 and Matthew 18, he says, no matter what, if things are relationally off between you and a brother in Christ, whether you did something to them or they did something to you, it didn't matter who did what, your job is to go seek reconciliation immediately, right away. Jesus even says, he says, leave your gift at the altar and first go be reconciled to your brother. So in just a moment, we're going to take communion together as a family. And part of what communion is supposed to represent, it's supposed to be a recommitment that we do each and every week, where it's about we are family together. The blood of Jesus makes us family together. And when we take part in communion, we're acknowledging the power of the resurrection, and we're pledging that to ourselves and to one another. And this is something we do to bear witness to the fact that Jesus has the power to make us family together. And if there is any conflict, that Jesus' resurrection power has the power to resolve that. And this means if you're in conflict with someone, or if you've willingly participated in false witness with someone else, and you're not going out of your way to resolve it, what you're communicating is that Jesus' resurrection power is not enough. And that church family is not worth fighting for, even though Jesus fought for that with his very life. So before you take part in communion this morning, I'd love if you took some time right now to sit with this morning's sermon and examine yourself a bit. Is there anything you need to confess to God? Are there ways you have knowingly or unknowingly been a false witness? And if so, confess those things to him now. Be reconciled before you approach communion. Secondly, is there any potential for false witness spreading in your relationships here? Maybe it's with your spouse or a friend or a life group member. If there is, I would ask you to engage in those conversations before taking communion together. Grab the person if they're here Talk about it in the lobby. Send a text if you need to discuss it later. Do whatever is necessary to clarify and reconcile so that these false stories and disunity will not continue to spread, because we want to be lovers of the truth. And here's the truth, is that Jesus came on a rescue mission to save us. Even though he was perfect, people lied about him. People defamed him. People tore down his name and said awful things behind his back, even though he came to save us from such sins. And on the cross, even in the moment of his greatest agony, he prayed for the false witnesses surrounding him, piling it on and watching his humiliation. Jesus, in some of his final words, said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Jesus, even in the midst of all of that, offers a word of grace and forgiveness over them. And we as followers of Jesus are empowered to do the same thing. So let those words speak over you even right now. Father, forgive us, for we do not know what we do. Father, forgive us the damage that we've caused. Father, forgive us, because your resurrection power can and will bring us together. So what I would love for us to do is to just sit with this for about a minute or so while the band plays. You just sit in your seat and just reflect and search your heart. Before we even take communion, at the end of this next minute, I'll close us out in prayer, and then we can participate in communion. But at this time, talk with God right now. Have the Spirit search you. Who do you need to be reconciled with before you can participate this morning in communion? Let's just sit with that for a minute.